Hello, my name is Emily Crawford Hatcher. I am a member of St. Gregorio's Orthodox Church here in Spokane, Washington, and I've been asked to speak briefly today about alcohol and addictions in general a little bit. Um, First of all, I was asked to do this because part of my training is also as a clinical psychologist. And I have some experience doing substance abuse treatment in some different areas in different parts of the country. So this is a topic that is familiar to me, and I have a little bit of passion about helping educate people about this and how to heal and get better. In the context of our Christian lives and our lives of faith, this may also have some different importance, a different level of importance for us. And so, for those reasons, I will start briefly. But before we do, we should probably begin as we always do, in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and pray that God will guide us and be with us on this journey. So, why talk about alcohol and addictions, especially for our young people? I was asked specifically to bring this topic up for our campus ministries program and some of the videos and lectures they're putting together. I know as a college professor for a little while, this topic is very relevant for people of that age group in this country in general, not necessarily for any particular group. Um, but for all young people of this age group, I guess I'll put it that way. As Christians, we know that alcohol is, it comes up in the scriptures. It's often part of everyday life for people. Even Christ changed water into wine. It's not that alcohol is necessarily bad or that it is never appropriate to use. It's present in our day-to-day lives, in our meals, our celebrations, our communion every weekend, every Sunday. We take that as part of the Eucharist. When it becomes a problem, however, it can become a separating force. It can separate us from our loved ones, our livelihoods, our goals, our values, our faith, and our Creator. Even St. Paul in the scriptures is very clear in his epistle to Ephesians, chapter 5. He writes, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. And do not be drunk with wine, in which is dissipation, but be filled with the Spirit." Even here, even 2,000 years ago, the apostles and the saints were encouraging us to avoid dissipation, to avoid drunkenness, because it is like not treating our gifts, our holy gifts, with respect. It's a way of not living the will of God that separates us from Him. Now, from a psychological perspective, from a more scientific perspective, we know that alcohol can become quickly addictive and quickly problematic for some people and for different reasons. For our young people, for people living away from home, maybe for the first time, or attending college for the first time, or just kind of finally beginning to walk into those adult roles and pathways. Alcohol is very much present, and in our culture in the US is often viewed as just part of how it's done. This is just part of what you do as a young American person, or a young college person. And yet we know, even for those folks for whom it's just part of a general experience, it can become problematic fairly quickly. So let's talk a little bit about how we can determine whether or not this is a problem. If you're interested in some really good resources, good information, you might check out SAMHSA's website. That's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They have some phenomenal up-to-date information, treatment screening tools, like to tell whether or not you might have a problem with alcohol. They've got great research and resources on their website available nationally and some local recommendations if you care to look. If you don't, you might just consider this brief test. One way to screen for yourself if alcohol or other substances for that matter might be a problem for you or for a loved one, try this equation. Take or calculate how many days per week you drink or use alcohol and multiply that by how many drinks per day you have. If your result is greater than 14 for men or greater than 7 for women, you may have a problematic drinking pattern. That might be worth a second opinion at that point. You might also consider that for those folks in the US 18 and older, close to 9% of our population in that age range, 18 and older, suffer from some form of an alcohol use disorder. That's a pretty high rate, percentage-wise. Among 18 to 29-year-olds, alcohol use disorders are at their highest. That's the group that we diagnose them the most frequently in. So it is our young people who tend to suffer from this disorder the most, hence this video. So just to give you a sense of what you might look for. Obviously you have that brief calculation you might try just as a screening tool again. If you have, or if you want to look for some other things to consider, stereotypically, people will get withdrawal symptoms, tolerance symptoms, meaning they need more of the same amount, they need more alcohol to achieve the same effect, or they don't experience the same effects when they just keep using the same amount of alcohol. That's tolerance. Some people will look for functional impairment. As a psychologist, that's one of the first things I look for actually in diagnosing someone, is whether or not alcohol use or other substance use is interfering with a person's ability to do the things that they want to or need to be able to do. So if it's getting in the way of getting to work or to school, or if people continue to use even when they know it might be problematic or physically dangerous for themselves, those might be indicators that you have some problematic drinking going on. A lot of people talk about alcohol or other substances becoming problematic when they realize they've tried to stop and they can't, when they've tried to cut down and they can't, when they are using more than they intended to, or when they are beginning to place that first. And that's coming before everything else. If you're not getting to church on Sunday because you drank too much the night before and you're not feeling well the next morning, maybe it's time to take a look at that pattern, that habit. Well, so another question comes up. How do we get these disorders? How do they develop for people? We know we don't catch them like the flu. It's not like a cold, and yet some people will still insist that alcoholism or addictions are diseases. So here's where some of that comes from. There's a lot of research that suggests about half of people with a substance use disorder have a family history of it. So we know some of this, and different research has looked at this in different ways. We know some people develop alcohol use disorders because of their genetic predisposition. However, the other half of people who have substance use disorders do not have a family history of it. They pick it up somewhere else. So they might begin, an alcohol use disorder might begin as a voluntary action, just some fun on the weekends or something like that, and turn into a problem or an addiction later. Most experts agree now it is not a question of nature or nurture. It's not genetics or the environment. It's more a question of how much of each of those things are contributing to the development of that disorder. And that's hard to tease apart. Ultimately, we know there are certain ways that learning and culture can influence addiction and alcohol use disorders. For example, alcoholism is much more likely to occur in societies like America that forbid children to drink but condone drunkenness in adulthood. Just think about some of the messages we send when it comes to advertisements and social media and our sort of social expectations of young adults in this country. It's almost like a rite of passage to expect a young person to get drunk on their 21st birthday, and yet to insist that it is inappropriate up to that point. When we have such kind of rigid and somewhat arbitrary timelines or markers for people, that might contribute to some of these alcoholic or alcohol use disorder patterns at a social level. Alcoholism rates may increase when people move from a culture of origin into a culture that has different drinking rules too. So for a lot of our immigrant families, this may be a consideration. This may be especially important for our Orthodox brothers and sisters in this country as they immigrate here from other places, to help educate and teach them about how to make that transition in healthier ways. So last question I guess I'll leave you to consider is, how do people get better? People can get better. People can overcome or work through alcohol problems or alcohol use disorders, addictions, however you want to view that. The best predictors of someone who we'd call an addict and their ability to learn to control excessive drug or alcohol use are how severe dependence on a drug is before that. So generally, the less severe, the easier it is for a person to work through that problem. If you catch a disorder earlier, it is easier to help a person recover. Social stability is also a big factor. If we can help provide social support for people to recover and turn away from drugs and alcohol, that can make a big difference. And then quite simply, the belief that it is necessary to recover or maintain abstinence from alcohol can make a huge difference. There are lots of different models for how to help people recover and get different kinds of treatment to help it, or to help people heal from an alcohol use disorder. Quite frankly, the relapse rates are pretty high, and that's more and more being viewed as part of the process of getting better. Not that it's inevitable, but that people relapse. We all fall down. We all make mistakes. Part of recovery and healing and becoming well is about finding ways back up again and to continue to strive on that path. And as Orthodox Christians, that's a message I hope that everyone is familiar with, and that's where I will leave you for this afternoon. Just some different thoughts to consider, and God bless you all, and thank you for this opportunity.